European Union countries have agreed to impose new tariffs of up to 35% on electric cars from China. That's on top of the existing 10% duties. The extra duties have been controversial, and the vote in Brussels was tense. Germany voted against the measure, as it fears Beijing could retaliate with its own tariffs that could hurt the German car industry. An EU probe accused Beijing of unfairly subsidizing Chinese electric car makers. The plans can still be dismissed if Brussels reaches a solution with China at the negotiating table. Let's bring in Terry Schulz, who's in Brussels for us. Terry, take us through this, the complications of this very contentious vote.
That's right. It was both complicated and contentious. And in the end, the European Commission is saying it received the necessary support because it can't really say that member states approved these measures. You had 12 abstentions, 12 countries that refused to take a stand. Meanwhile, you had 10 countries that did approve the measure, led by the very big countries of France, Poland, and Italy, with Germany on the other side opposing these tariffs, backed by only Hungary, Malta, Slovakia, and Slovenia. So while it's long been clear that this would probably pass in this way, it's definitely not with overwhelming support from member states who are very much afraid of what China will do in response.
Now, what about the geopolitical dimensions of this?
But that's the big question. I mean, China's already made preliminary moves to retaliate, not necessarily in the automobile sector, although that, of course, could come as well. They're looking at the dairy sector, the liquor sector, and it is all part of these wider negotiations that are ongoing with China constantly about trade measures. The Commission, of course, is spinning this as a win, as they may, because, of course, they will publish this in an official journal by the end of the month, and then the measures will come into effect. But Ursula von der Leyen wanted to take a strong stance at the beginning of her second term, laying out these measures against China and saying, look, we are not going to back down on this. The European Union is not going to be a pushover when it comes to trade policy. But we must say that negotiations do continue. The Commission has until October 30th to publish these in the official journal. And they're explaining right now in an off-the-record briefing that, things could change. It's not exactly clear what will be published by the end of the month. And perhaps there will be some ameliorating measures coming from China. The Commission contends it does not want to impose these tariffs. It simply wants to respond to what it calls injurious subsidization by the Chinese government of its own industry.
That was DW's Terry Schulz there from Brussels. And let's do a bit of a deeper dive now with Stephen Beardsley from our business desk, who joins me here in the studio. Stephen, as soon as the camera swung around, yes, there we are. So, first of all, financial markets, how have they reacted?
Yeah, we've seen them react somewhat modestly. We do see that car companies in Europe are up, for example. If we look at VW, if we look at Renault, if we look at Stellantis, these are the bigger car companies here. They're all up about 1.5% or so, right? And that's been the whole morning. They've been gaining. They've tailed off a little bit after the announcement. So it's not a big jump. We do see that with Volvo, which is owned by a Chinese company, Geely, that it's up 5%. And that's because Volvo announced that it actually is already working on an agreement between the EU and China to go around these tariffs and create another deal. Something that Terry was just mentioning is that ideally many countries want to see a deal between the two sides instead of these tariffs. So I think that if we see a deal in the future, then you're going to see the markets react in a more positive way. But what they see right now is that this step was taken, but that the full story hasn't been written yet. Perhaps in a month, we will see what happens when these tariffs are expected to go into place. Right now, this is just the next step that's been taken, but the full story isn't quite there.
Now, let's talk about Germany voting against this. One should think Germany, big car-making nation, right. They don't want cheap Chinese imports flooding the market. Why did Germany vote against this? You would think this doesn't make sense to many people at first glance, but Germany doesn't want this because they've said to every single aspect of this, every single stakeholder has said this, I should say, that is auto managers, labor, and the government themselves all have said we don't want this, and it's because of a trade war. They say this is what we fear. This is going to be a downward spiral that ends us
ends up biting us back, backfiring more than it does helping us. Remember that the German automotive industry has a major presence in China still. And yes, we read every day that that market share is falling. They're getting beaten on EVs, but they still have a lot of other cars too, internal combustion engines. They're selling there. Profit margins are still good on those. They hope to make more money in China, and this could really hurt them.
Now, talking about money, what's at stake here?
It's hard to say because it's not just as simple as saying Chinese electric vehicles are going to be 35% more expensive, because it depends. Are they going to be exported less once this happens, or are they going to eat some of that price? We don't know what it's really going to look like. But what we do know is that consumer choice will fall. If you wanted a cheaper car, you don't have that option now, most likely, because either it's not going to be exported here in the first place, or it's automatically going to be pricier. So consumer choice suffers. And then there are the secondary and tertiary effects if a trade war does start. We know that dairy, for example, out of the EU is being looked at. We know that pork exports into China are being looked at. So those industries could then suffer, and that will be a problem as well. So the overall costs have yet to be figured out, especially if there is a trade war that gets kicked off and that leads to this kind of tit for tat, and then neither side has much to show for it. That is the big fear.
Now, there's no real winner in a trade war ever. Thank you very much, Stephen Beardsley there from our business department.